So guess what? I'm here with Jackson Hinkle and Kurt Metzger, and guess what? The news has been slanting their coverage of wars. You're kidding. So this is from FAIR, which stands for Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. And they say invasion news fits the front page more when an enemy does the invading. So they've been actually doing more front page news about Ukraine than they did about Iraq. Yeah, it's according. So look, see that? So percentage of front page stories. The blue is Ukraine, the red is Iraq. So this is in April, and this is in May. They did way more stories about Ukraine than they ever did about Iraq.
Well, in fairness, I care way more about Ukraine than I ever did about Iraq.
FAIR examined front pages of the New York Times between April 1st and April 30th, 2022, and then compared them to those from May 1st to May 31st of 2003. That's when we were in Iraq. The dates represent the second full calendar months of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the U.S. invasion of Iraq, respectively. Major armed conflicts involving major world powers illegally invading smaller countries. In April 2022, there were a total of 179 stories on the New York Times front page, and 79, meaning 44% of them, concerned the Ukraine invasion. Look at that. Almost half, almost every other story on the front page of the New York Times in April of 2022 was about Ukraine. All but 3 were located at the top of the page. That's above the fold, where the editors put the stories they consider to be the most important stories of the day. Fully 75% of all top-of-the-page stories were about the Ukraine war. Not a single day went by without a Ukraine story being published on the top of the page. And on 14 different days, only stories about Ukraine were published on the top of the front page. Did you want to say?
How many, how does that compare to the number of stories that were loaded into Stephen Colbert? Now, what did he cover?
Stephen Colbert had 49 stories loaded into him in April alone. That's more than one story a day. In May 2003, when there were 226 stories on the front page, only 41 of them, or 18%, reported on the Iraq invasion. So 44% to 18%. That's a big difference. 32 of those were at the top of the page with 9 below them. That's a lot. Now you're confusing me with numbers. This means that what does this mean? What does it mean? Tell me what it means, FAIR.
What does it mean, Jimmy?
Well, this means, Kurt, that a major conflict launched by the country where the paper is published was given less than half as many front page articles, and a third of the top of the front page where highest priority stories are placed, compared to a war in which the country was not directly involved.
So they can follow instructions.
So, so I don't have to explain to you what that means. You know what that means. The apparently greater newsworthiness of military aggression when committed by an official enemy of the United States isn't just on display on the Times front page. A study of the ABC, CBS, and NBC nightly news shows to have found that the first full month of the Ukraine war got more coverage than the peak month of coverage of the Iraq war, 562 minutes to 455 minutes. Of the 79 front page New York Times stories on the war in Ukraine in May 2022, 14 of them were primarily about civilian deaths. Really? So they're talking about civilian deaths in Ukraine because Russia did it. And it all was at the top of the page. But when we did Iraq, the Office of UN High Commission for Human Rights estimated that there were at least 3,153 civilian... Wait, I screwed that up. But in contrast, during the month of Iraq coverage, there was only one story about civilian deaths at the... Wait a minute. How many stories? 14 of them were about civilian deaths in Ukraine. When we invaded Iraq, there was only one story. So that's a 1,400% increase. If you could have that, I don't know if numbers work like that.
Do we know, like, the difference between like our civilian deaths caused in Iraq versus what Russia is doing in Ukraine? Has somebody like put those numbers together ever?
Let's see. Maybe there'll be some numbers later on in this report, Kurt.
Oh.
The lack of coverage, however, did not reflect a lack of civilian casualties during this period. Iraq's body count have estimated that at least 7,900 civilian, so that's almost 8,000 civilian deaths had occurred by the end of May. Now, in Ukraine, they say so a lot more in Iraq. So that's your question, right, Kurt?
Yeah.
There you go.
And they're also considering that 3,153 to be civilians killed in the Donbass because they consider that to be Ukraine.
Oh, so these people killed here are probably killed by Ukrainian government, a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So the Times has a history of downplaying civilian casualties at the hands of the U.S. military. The contrast between intense interest in civilians killed by Russia and minimal attention to civilians killed by the United States matches a previous FAIR study that they did in March of 2022. It found 27 mentions on the nightly network news shows in the first week of the Ukraine invasion, identifying Russia as responsible for harming civilians, as compared to 9 mentions in the first week of the Iraq invasion that reported on the U.S. harming civilians, fewer than the 12 mentions that depicted the U.S. helping Iraqi civilians. So they were doing more stories about U.S. helping Iraqi civilians than they were about them killing them.
What, on to the next life?
So there you go. So turns out Chomsky was right. The corporate media manufactures consent for the establishment. And who's the establishment? The establishment that owns them and advertises on them. That would be the military-industrial complex in Wall Street.
I bet if you told it, a lot of people, you told this to, they go, yeah, right. That's how you're supposed to, we downplay what you do.
Yes.
People don't even think that's a big deal.
Yes, people think, well, of course, we're going to be nicer to our side.
There can be only one. It's like the Highlander. You want us not to be the big...
They act like we're always fighting Hitler. Like,
what are you, an isolationist? Here's your 2 choices.
Right? So they would be okay because they look at it like we're fighting Hitler. So it's okay to lie if you're fighting Hitler. So every fight is Hitler. The January 6th is fighting Hitler.
Yeah, right.
Every fight is fighting fascism and Hitler. And so now it makes it okay to do everything and break every rule and be and lie.
Wow. Thank you for... I don't want to say thank God for Hitler, but he's helped America out of a lot of jams.
A lot of jams. Jackson, you have any commentary on this?
I just find it interesting that, of course, there's not even any documentation from FAIR as to the inability of the Western press to coverage the 15,000 civilians that were killed over the past 8 years in the Donbass with the U.S. arming of Ukrainian nationalists.
Well, it's just going to be demoralizing. I don't think they want.
Come on,
it's too sad. That doesn't sell.
Yeah, that's right. So nobody talks about that. The 8-year period that led up to this invasion by Putin, the Ukrainian government continued to shell and kill 15,000 people in the Donbass region. So that still doesn't make it okay for Putin to do what he did.
Yeah,
Mr. YouTube censor.
Completely unjustified.
Completely unjustified. War of naked aggression. Hey, we're doing live stand-up comedy coming to your town, Indianapolis, Louisville, Cincinnati, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Detroit, Rochester. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all the tickets for all our dates. See you in Denver, too.